Hey everybody, Josh here. I just want to give some thoughts on the Voice Referendum that is due to be voted on in Australia in October of this year. In 1995, when South Africa were reforming under Nelson Mandela, the president before was a guy called de Klerk, and he released Nelson Mandela, who had previously been a Leninist Marxist communist. And while he was in prison, Mandela switched his belief over to the cultural Marxism of Marcuse and Gramsci and the Frankfurt School. And he became the president of South Africa, and they established what's known as a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And what happened in South Africa was that the Indigenous population started to persecute the white farmers and business owners, so much so that a lot of them fled, having their properties taken over by mobs and other things like that. And basically it wasn't what was promised. There was no reconciliation. Truth was, people were told what the truth was. They weren't, there wasn't any sort of democratic negotiation about it. And just in general, South Africa has gone downhill from there, so much so that there are calls for genocide in the political class against the remaining white population. And it's a bit of a nightmare. Ironically, Canada has their own Truth and Reconciliation Commission establishing for its Indigenous people at the moment. And so is Sri Lanka. Truth and Reconciliation, same name. And basically what the Voice is a Makarrata, the Voice, Makarrata, and then the reparations, which is basically the same thing. A Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This is not something that originated in the Aboriginal opinion. It's not like Aboriginals got together and said, this is what we want. They imported other people's ideas and contextualized it to the Aboriginal people. And Australia, rather than making just a commission, is elevating that to editing the Constitution to make it really hard to get rid of. Now, you collect, more than a dozen people and you ask their opinion on some controversial issues, you're going to get a variation of opinion. So to pretend that the Voice is going to represent the Aboriginal people and the Torres Strait Islanders people as if they all have the same opinion is a joke. What's going to happen, just by the sheer, not necessarily like preordained, but this is what always happens, is that certain Indigenous people are going to be given a monicum of power. And with that power, they are going to be the final say in what the Aboriginal Voice says, regardless of any Indigenous person or groups that disagree. So it's a false premise. The Westminster system that we live under, that we have in Australia, means that the people are divided into sections based on population. That the people in that region, that electorate, vote for a representative, and the job of the politician that they vote for is to bring the needs of those people into the parliament and to be their voice. That is our system. And if the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people feel like they don't have a voice, then the way to deal with that is to elect someone that will speak for them in their electorate. If they're unhappy, they already have the right of self-determination in the vote that we already have, just like you or I do. And so to change the Constitution to bring in a voice to Parliament is basically ignoring the fact that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people feel that they don't have a voice and they're not being heard and that they're not being treated, they feel like they're not being treated equally. And I'm talking about the rural Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people. The urban Indigenous population is very different to the rural and the people that are far away and hard to communicate with. Ultimately, what will happen is the people who yell the loudest and are the most savvy will get the power. And then what is happening in politics at the moment is that they will try and impose their views onto the rest of them. So in other words, the voice, this is my big problem. The voice has no safeguards in it at all that have been mentioned to guarantee that the people with power will not be telling all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, Indigenous people, what their opinion is, rather than what they should be doing, which is going around and talking to people and asking them, what would you like to bring up in Parliament? This is just dodgy. Dodgy, dodgy, dodgy. We have come a long way in Western culture against racism. Surely we have learnt something by now that you don't separate people into classes, who's Indigenous and who's non-Indigenous, and then giving certain people favoritism over the other. That just breeds hate. And I don't understand why people are not bringing that up. There is more. This is a political move based on global socialism and global communist thinking. And the poor Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people, the rural Indigenous population of Australia, are being used. They are victims of this. They are being treated poorly by the people that say they are fighting for their rights. They are being used and abused. And that needs to stop. And this voice is exactly the opposite of what it is going to be. It's not going to be a democratic voice. It's going to be a totalitarian voice telling everybody, all the Indigenous people, what their opinion is and what they're supposed to be, what their voice is going to say to Parliament. The reason you can tell that this isn't about race, but it's about power, is because the Indigenous people that have come out against the voice have got such vitriolic hate in response. Now, if we were trying to treat our Indigenous people more kindly, surely it wouldn't matter what their opinion is if it's based on their ancestry. But because these particular Aboriginal people, like Jacinta Price and Anthony Mundine, or is that his first name? Mundine, these people would be treated with respect because of their cultural heritage. But they're not. They're being treated like rubbish because they don't have the right opinion That's what this voice is about. It is about the right socialist agenda opinion. It is not about the Indigenous people. That's how you can prove it. Because when Indigenous people disagree with the position that the government of the day wants them to have, they get attacked. Do you think it's going to be any different if the voice gets in? If the voice gets in and we establish a voice to Parliament, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, Indigenous people who don't agree with the people that have the power of the voice, they are going to be shut down, isolated, shut up. It is not going to be a democratic voice. It is going to be a totalitarian voice. Because no matter how much you want them to be, Aboriginal people are individuals. They're not some magical collective that all think as one, that have exactly the same ideas about land and magic and animal spirits and all those other things. They are very unique and wonderful. I absolutely agree with Australians learning more about Indigenous cultures, but not the whitewashed, pardon the pun, not the crafted cultures that the cultural anthropologists of Australia have given them. I want to know the real Aboriginal people, the real Torres Strait Islanders people. I want to know about their culture from their mouth. I don't want them to parrot the cultural anthropologists' narrative that they've been selling to them for the last 50 years. If you want to look up a communist whistleblower or an ex-communist who was whistleblowing on the communist agenda with the Aboriginal land rights, this is back in 1984. I have a video on this channel and you can find it other places. It's called Red Over Black, outlining the communist agenda to use the Aboriginal people, the Indigenous people of Australia, to drive a wedge of division down the centre of this country. That plan may have made some changes since then, some nuances and some differences, but it's basically the same plan. To separate people, to cause division, to stir up strife, and to use them to destroy the ideas of Western culture and freedom and liberty. Because they hate it. I don't know why they hate it. They hate it. So please think carefully about how you're going to vote. Recognize that very few things in politics these days does what it says on the pack. Do you really trust government to do exactly what they've said in a way that gives regular human beings a voice? During the pandemic, this is my understanding, I haven't fact-checked this or anything, but there was some enforced injections into the Indigenous population of the Northern Territory. They were invading their bodies with drugs without their consent, and the people were upset. Their elders were upset about it. If that's how they get treated, no wonder they're angry. And no wonder they look at us and they say, you guys don't care about us. Well, I'm here to say that we do care about you. We care about you a lot. And the government, the politicians and the NGOs and the people that are in power and say that they're looking out for your best interests are keeping you from us. They're keeping you isolated. They don't want you and us to be friends. Well, I'm here to say I want to be your friend. I care about you. I care about your history. I'm interested. I want to know. And if I can help with money or whatever, I will. But just don't do this voice thing, because I think you're getting taken for a ride. Love yous all.